Welcome back to The Benchmark. I'm Kallie Ejigu. We've been speaking with Jackson Zinganyi of Upfront on Voice of America. We're going to completely change the discussion now. I want to get a little personal.
I'm all about it.
I want to get a little personal.
What?
Well, I mean, I think that we've kind of been skirting the elephant in the room, or I have.
And I didn't realize there was an elephant in the room.
Yeah, well, it's my elephant. It's my elephant. I wanted to discuss a little bit how the conflict in Rwanda had personally affected you in your life.
Well, okay. Well, the conflict in Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda that took place in 1994, I was outside. I had some of my family members, extended family members, that were one part of were in the war, and others were killed during the genocide. It's a very traumatic episode in our history. It affected everybody, including those who were on the other side. It's something that we will not forget, at least in our generation or even generations to. Not that we want to forget, because we don't want something of that nature to ever happen again, but we always have memorials each year. There's a memorial coming up very soon this year as a way to celebrate the lives of those that passed away, and also just to remember, because it happened in Rwanda, but then the world said never again. But then look what happened in Darfur. We're hoping that what happened in Rwanda will never happen again. So the world takes some lessons from what happened in our country. It's something that stays with us. It will stay with us for the rest of our lives.
Right.
So yeah, it really did immensely affect us.
Well, like you said, the big statement everyone made was not again, never again, never again. And like you said, I mean, it happened in Darfur. Why is this mistake something that Africans, do you think, that we're not learning from? What is it that we can't overcome or learn?
Right. Conflict is bound to happen anywhere. It's just that when it does take place and the government or leadership in power becomes the instrument with which becomes the tool to decimate a certain group of people because of their ethnicity, because of whatever background they have, or because of their location. I think the onus is now on the international community to say, how much can we let this happen? For how long can we drag our feet before we take action? The international community watched when it was happening in Rwanda. They said there were so many justifications for why they did not intervene. One, it's a civil war, people just killing each other, they are Africans. Plays into the stereotypes about the continent. We are conflict prone and blah blah blah. But it happened again in Darfur, and unfortunately, it's not even the governments, the Western government, that's responded. It was more the civil society. Students like yourself and others and myself. We are the ones out here,
right?
drumming it up. Going to Congress and media, news media outlets and having people speak out. I know one of the guys who went to my school as a girl, were one of the first few people who brought the images of what was happening in Darfur. As they had gone there to visit as part of their master's thesis, to just film, and they realized the carnage that was taking place. And when they showed it to the world, first people were kind of in disbelief. They know it just happened in Rwanda. There's no way genocide can be taking place, happening again, But I guess everything is a learning experience. Rwanda was the worst tragedy that at least in our lifetime. Over 1 million people dead in 3 months. It's never happened anywhere else. We're hoping it never happens again. We'll still drum that. We'll hope that if the more we say it, the less likelihood it will happen. So right now, what's happening in Libya, it brings again. I was on my toes yesterday, on the edge all day, waiting for the UN to pass this no-fly zone resolution yesterday. All day, I was even like during happy hour after work, like checking my, and I was like, yes, when they finally voted on it. But look at how long it took them. Gaddafi, who was clearly crazy, was killing his people from day one. It's how many weeks later now, and then finally it's like, oh, let us respond. Let's say he's been, there was mass murder that was taking place, so in the country. It's only right now that the world would be responding.
But do you think that it took that long? I mean, we're getting a little divergent, but the reason why I ask is, I guess it's still slightly on issue. Like we discussed earlier, we talked about the Ivory Coast and the lack of media coverage there, forgetting any kind of international reaction or any kind of stopping of anything, let alone the hundreds of elections that have happened in Africa where people were massacred for exercising their free rights. Do you really think that I'm surprised with how quickly the international community
responded
is responding
to Libya.
And then on this, it's kind of like a double coin too, because it is an Arab state versus, unfortunately, sub-Saharan Africa is just
exactly. And also, I think the U.S. did not want to take a lead on this one, and they were hoping that it does not become another U.S. war, where they feel like it's the U.S. attacking an Islamic state. So they waited until the Arab League accepted to get on board with the no-fly zone, and then France, which has been pushing it for quite a while, which took a lead. France has actually also been very active in Ivory Coast, if you've been following that. But of course, that's a whole different discussion. But how long do you take to respond? There's so many. On my show next week, we're actually going to be talking about that. Do you feel, and the other thing, by the way, very interesting about my show is that 1 week before we do the show, I send out questions to a group of people on different parts of the continent to discuss it, and then we play the audio, their reactions. So next week, I guess I will give you a consensus of whether people think that how, if it's an internal conflict, should the international community respond, and how long should it take to respond?
Right.
Now, what if the state is the main player in enforcing a certain form of brutality on its citizens? Should the world just sit by and say, it's an internal conflict? Then let's talk a little bit about the AU, by the way, which seems to often drag its feet every time there's a conflict on the African continent. People will cry out loud, say, please come and rescue us and save us. Even with the whole world saying, we are tired of being the U.S. being, policeman of the world, blah, blah, blah. It only takes, until the U.S. says something, they will never say anything.
Right, and then when the U.S. does do something, there's a backlash.
They will blame it,
Right. If we can get back to you, I think something that's incredibly fascinating, and I don't know if you've reflected on it on yourself, but I think it's fascinating that Radio Rwanda was instrumental.
Right.
Single-handedly.
Oh yes.
In
there were a couple of media outlets. One of them was Radio Rwanda, which was a propaganda tool.
Right. But what I wanted to get to was the fact that you got into radio, and I don't know if you've made that. I think it's just fascinating to me, the fact that something that was instrumental in breaking up the country is something that you have propelled yourself into.
No.
I don't know if you've made any reflections on that.
No, I've not really. And if I did, I've talked a lot about the role of media in being in having been responsible or played a role in what took place in Rwanda. One, it wasn't just Radio Rwanda. There was the notorious RTLM, which was very instrumental in creating the atmosphere that led to the genocide, and even during the genocide, playing different roles, but mainly to encourage killers to continue killing.
Right.
Now, for me as an 18-year-old, when I came in, I did not have any moral inclinations whether I should get into it. I didn't even know that much the role of radio in creating. But if I did, I guess my defense would be I wanted to change things.
Right.
You know? Which is, by the way, what happened when the current government came in. The one thing that they tried to do was to take away, identifying people by ethnicities.
Right.
And so on Radio Rwanda, they don't mention ethnicities at all because they don't want to kind of play on the old stereotypes or recreate that animosity among people that led to what happened.
Right.
And so the government is very sensitive about that. So we were more about reconciliation. It was reconciliation politics, And of course, it's another discussion again, reconciling with who, about what.
Right.
We get into discussions of, the offender and the offended and blah, blah, blah. But radio, having been instrumental in creating this type of conditions that led to the genocide, was also very instrumental in reconciling or in a post-genocide era, being the tool with which people would go to listen to for solace. It was the only voice. We don't have a reading culture in my country as much. People don't read as much, but they listen to radio. Radio is very. I mean, I used to go on air, and I can tell you, the whole country would be listening to me. It's not like there are how many FM stations at the time when I was on air. I would know that everybody from the president to the person in the village was listening to my show because it was the only. Radio is very popular. Number two, we didn't have a very vibrant TV station, So and TV had not yet proliferated into very many provinces in the country, but so. Radio is very popular in the country. That's why it was very effective in creating the situation that it did. Pretty much, it has. There are FM stations right now. The role they play are very different from the role pre-genocide radio stations in Rwanda did.
Right.
They're playing a very different role. I think they've moved to a different message. They embraced a different message, a different agenda, which is reflective of the government, what the government is, doing.
What do you think it is about radio, or really media in general, that's so persuasive with people? I mean, you had mentioned that...
The mystique.
You think?
The mystique.
What is the mystique?
Well, the mystique is people, the talking box, the mystique of the talking box, the voice behind the microphone. We don't know this voice, this box. I don't know if you've read stories about how colonialists and in no way want to say radio is a tool of colonialism. I'm just saying, remember, I don't know if you read, I was reading a book called Ghosts of King Leopold.
Okay.
And it's in based in Congo. It's a real life account of how Leopold was able to take lots of land from the Congolese by bringing a mirror and showing people a mirror, and then people like freaking out.
Right.
Chiefs are like, then take all this. It's just there's an element of, and by the way, I don't know if people will make that connection, but I'm just saying in general, there's a level of people getting fascinated with the voice behind radio, and people recognize your voice, they recognize your personality. If you can easily influence people by just saying things that's the power of media, the power of radio, is that it happens. It's somebody speaking to you about your experiences or about other experiences right next to you, but you don't even get to see them. You know.
I'm surprised you weren't gonna talk about how, because you began to talk about how there isn't a reading culture, and I think a lot of African cultures have this the culture of like the griot or storytelling,
Oral culture,
oral tradition, and so I think that
that also part of it,
yeah.
exactly. That also definitely that plays into that too. The oral culture, the storytelling, and this is a medium with which people tell stories, and it's right there telling you stories. You know. It will influence you in so many ways.
Right.
If it was a book, probably have a different effect than the radio station.
Totally.
Think about it right now in the U.S. Congress just passed a bill to defund NPR. The GOP-led Congress. They understand the power that NPR has.
Right.
They
with their target. But also the problem with books is that it depends on literacy, which is unfortunately another issue.
Another big issue on the continent.
Right.
And I think we're seeing numbers rising now, increasing. I don't know specific figures, but I know that there's a high increase in, first of all, primary school enrollment. Many countries are embracing universal primary education. Uganda is, Rwanda is. I don't know about Ethiopia, probably they have for a while. But if people have the basic understanding of things around them, the environment, that is part of literacy.
Right.
You don't necessarily have to go to a school to obtain education, but if radio can be a medium of education too.
Right. That's true. And I wanted to get back to Rwanda, but kind of on another note. Unfortunately, the prevailing narrative of Rwanda has been the genocide.
Right.
And anytime anyone speaks about Rwanda, immediately I think that's the image that comes to people's minds. And in the same way, Ethiopia, the famine in the 80s, immediately people,
the 1995 famine.
The place where people were starving, or what do you think it will take to turn over? We touched upon it a little bit, but what do you think it will take? Because, like you said, it's our responsibility to change the perception of Ethiopia. That's where the starving people are. Even Africa, as a continent, unfortunately, is seen as like a country, because in the sense that there's so much ignorance. That's where all those black people are who are starving. What do you think it's going to take to, as a journalist?
It will take time. It will take time. Perceptions are hard to beat.
Right.
So I think we're in a generation where I think it's so close to us in time that it's easy to remember and to see and reflect. It's part of our daily popular culture. We speak about it. There are movies about the Rwandan genocide. Positive things that are happening in Rwanda. Fortunately, 17 years after the genocide, that the narrative is changing slowly. Rwanda is being known as one of the countries, the biggest business reformers on the continent, in the world actually. The World Bank, I think last year, awarded them, they mentioned them as having been the best reformers in business. They have a very vibrant private sector. The President Kagame is being talked about in terms of being a very visionary leader, progressive leader. So media is beginning to speak about Rwanda in different terms and less about the genocide. And when they talk about the genocide, they talk about in terms of the lessons learned.
Right.
And that's a good thing. And hopefully with time, that the narrative changes. And I guess the media will play that role in changing the narrative.
Right.
Because there's so many good stories about Rwanda that go under the radar and never get told.
Do you think you'll go back and
yeah,
live?
At some point, I probably will. But the thing is, and I've told many people, people about this, is that if I feel that I'm making a difference from where I am, there's no need necessarily for me to move back. I feel right now I am making that difference. on a continental level, not just in Rwanda, I feel I affect the life of many young people by what I do, you know, and that's why I love my job. I feel I wake up every morning saying, yes, I feel there's an impact that I'm creating. And I'm not saying this because I sit behind the desk. There are studies we commission people to go out in the field and say, okay, do you listen to Upfront? How much do you like it? The show has been doing really well in terms of that, that people have been positively, responding to it. Now, about me moving back to the continent, probably not now, maybe not in the next couple of years, but one day. You never know where
I'm surprised to hear you say that, because we were talking a while ago about your citizenship, and I think it's hilarious because I know a lot of Africans here who refuse to take American citizenship because whether it be jingoism, whether it be just great pride.
It's pride. I'm very proud of my heritage. Now, owning an American passport is not going to change my identity. I think I will always be a Rwandan at heart. I've lived in Rwanda less time than I've lived anywhere else in the world. I've lived in Uganda more than I've lived in Rwanda. I've lived in the U.S. more than I lived in Rwanda. But I'm inherently, I have that deep sense of connection to that country, and that will carry on. I want that to carry on to from my generation to generations after me and after me. I want to carry that regardless of where I live. The beauty about this country, the USA, and the times that we live in is that if you choose that, then you're not going to lose it.
Right.
That's why we have, for example, I'm part of a community organization here, association. Part of what we do is to encourage people to appreciate their culture, to be in tune, we want to be that bridge between the diaspora Rwandans and back home.
Are you talking about the Rwanda International Network? I want you to talk about that, which you co-founded, and you are the vice president of. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Sure.
The Rwanda International Network Association is one of those things that started after we were having conversations in my living room with my friends, and we're like, dude, we've moved here. I think Rwandans if they're the smallest population in the U.S. for any African immigrant group.
Oh, really?
Yes. When I came here in 2000, outside the embassy, there were very few people that I knew in the D.C. area. Now, there are very many, like they're in hundreds now. But still, compared to Ethiopians...
But that's it? Just in the hundreds?
Yes. I mean, in the U.S., we could be like 1,000... like a 500 or to 600 in the DC area.
Okay.
But that's just within the last 6 years, 7 years. In the US, part of it also has to do with the fact that, given that Rwanda is a francophone country, most Rwandans would go to Canada, where there's a big francophone community. So we have lots of Rwandans up there, and we seek to embrace them to be part of membership of RENA. But we're having this chat in my living room a couple of years ago. Like, okay, so there's so many. There's an Ethiopian association. There's an association for Nigerians. But we don't want to necessarily be in that traditional community organization. As we have these goals that probably we never achieve. But we just want to create something simple where if you come in and you're from Rwanda and you don't even know how to get a driver's license, we want to create a database for you, or a connection for you to be able to know how to do that.
Right.
To get through that. We want to set up a process. A connection for you if you don't have a job, and there's a job at my workplace. Before I tell anybody else, I will inform you. Create those interlinkages among the community.
Right.
Then we spread it farther down. Like, okay, it's a growing community. So many kids are being born here, don't know the language. How do we teach them our language? So we have classes for teaching kids how to speak the language. We have dance and teaching them how to dance our cultural dance,
Right.
which is very beautiful. And then we have these annual get-togethers. Our very first one was a couple of years ago, I think 2006, which was quite big. We actually had about an attendance of 500, which is record, because
Which is the
given
whole
probably
population.
the whole population. And we had the king of Rwanda there, and the
Wow.
ambassador. We had food and dancing and acting and drama. It was just beautiful. And we've been going on. Right now we are partnered with the Chicago School of Psychology. We're trying to create classes around the issue of immigration to the USA, and it's not going to be just for Rwandans but also just Africans in general, because we do share common problems when we migrate here. We have the same problems that, say, the Irish when they immigrated here as Ethiopians, and we want to. The Chicago School of Psychology reached out to us and said, they even gave us an office actually in their premises, and said, we want to work together to create this partnership in where you can give us an understanding of some of the issues that you go through, so that we can incorporate them in our syllabus.
Right.
And so that's RENA basically. And we seek out membership from all over. Any Rwandan we are apolitical, and so we tell people we don't have any political ideas or ideology. Just think about us as family.
Right.
We were trying to be your family outside the country.
Mm-hmm.
And from the very basic things, when somebody loses a relative back home, we all come together and we go and visit them, and we become their family right there
Right.
and then, when they
Right.
have a baby, we do the same thing, Those little things. We never used to, when I came here, we didn't have those things.
Mm-hmm.
We never.
And so you're doing so much for your community, and not just the Rwandan community, but for all of us Africans in the diaspora. You really are kind of leaving a legacy, and you're quite a visionary in that
thank
sense.
you.
Which is why, of course, I invited you on the show.
Oh, thank you.
And with that, I'm curious to know what is the legacy that you do hope that you leave behind, or what is the benchmark that you've set for yourself?
I want if by the time I get done with what I'm doing, obviously I don't want to feel like at some point I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing. I want this to continue in some form. If it's in radio, I want to at some point to continue having a radio show. I will always have something to say, But I want to feel like I helped change a mind about one. I changed the attitude about the continent. I helped change the continent, young people's attitude towards thinking in terms of providing solutions for themselves, understanding the amount of power they have on the continent. If somebody can listen to my show one day and say, "Oh man, that radio show inspired me to do this," if somebody's doing it now, my work is done. I'm done. I'm ready to retire. But I want that to continue, and I want to inspire more young people to get into the business, to follow my path. I came in here, I didn't have family or anybody that I knew, and like most people immigrate here and they have like an uncle or an auntie. I came to this place without anybody else, and I was able to go to undergraduate school, did my 4 years, and grad school, did my 2 years. I was able to buy a house. I was able to, do all these things with nothing really about, my own sense of purpose and drive. If, the young people that are growing up in my community can see that, and that is my story inspires them, then very good.
Well, thank you so much, Jackson. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Kallie. Thank you for,
it's been a pleasure having you.
For letting me come to your show. I appreciate that.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn more about Jackson or his show, Upfront Africa, please go and visit upfrontafrica.com. And don't forget to visit us at ebstv.tv. Feel free to send us an email, comments, questions at thebenchmark@ebstv.tv. I'm Kallie Ejigu. This has been The Benchmark. Thanks for watching and stay tuned.